Take a breath. Go on, a real one. That gas that just slid into your lungs and lit up every cell in your body, the one thing you cannot survive without for more than a few minutes, was once the deadliest poison this planet had ever seen. Not a metaphor, a genuine world-ending toxin. Around 2.5 billion years ago, a single kind of microbe began pumping this gas into the sky, and in doing so, it triggered what may be the largest mass killing in the entire history of life. It poisoned nearly everything alive. It turned the oceans to rust, and then it froze the whole planet into a ball of ice. The name scientists gave this catastrophe tells you exactly how they see it. They call it the Oxygen Holocaust. And here's the part that genuinely rewires my sense of the world. You are only alive to hear this because it happened. So let me tell you the strangest survival story ever written. The one where the poison won and then became us. To feel how upside down that is, you have to step into a world that ran on completely different rules. Rewind to a 3 billion-year-old Earth, and you land on a place you could not walk across for a single breath. Its sky is not blue. A low, sullen haze of methane tints everything a dirty orange, and the seas below are green and iron gray, stagnant in a way modern water never is. All the life there is invisible to the naked eye. Slicks of microbes in the shallows, films of them smeared over wet rock, mats of them breathing sulfur and iron and carbon down in the lightless deep. This is life, but life on terms you would not recognize. To these organisms, oxygen is not the stuff of survival at all. Oxygen is corrosive. This gas rips their fragile molecules apart on contact. For the overwhelming majority of the time living things have existed here, free oxygen was the enemy, and the world got along perfectly well without a whisper of it in the air. Everything you were ever taught about air meaning life is about to run in reverse, because on that young Earth, oxygen would have been a death sentence, and almost nothing living bothered to make it. And yet something began to. Our villain arrives now, and the strangest thing about it is that it looks nothing like a villain. It looks like pond scum. Somewhere in those shallow seas, a humble blue-green microbe called a Cyanobacterium stumbled onto a trick that would rewrite an entire planet. It learned to eat sunlight. By splitting water and carbon dioxide and weaving itself a body out of pure light, it pulled off what remains, by any honest measure, one of the great miracles of chemistry, the distant ancestor of every leaf and blade of grass you have ever seen. But miracles leave exhaust behind them. The waste product of this brilliant new way of living was a reactive, ravenous gas that the cyanobacteria simply vented and forgot. That gas was oxygen. No alarm sounded because, at the scale of a single microbe, nothing happens quickly. There was no rolling cloud of poison, no visible spread, no moment you could point to and call the beginning. There was only one organism, breathing out its garbage, then splitting in two, then splitting again, across hundreds of millions of years. Sit with that stretch of time because it is almost impossible to hold in your head. Not centuries or millennia, but a slow, patient drip of toxin that ran on longer than the whole reign of the dinosaurs, several times over. It may be the most unhurried act of contamination in all of history, carried out by something far too small to see and far too simple to know what it was doing. Now comes the twist I genuinely did not see coming the first time I learned it, and I'll admit it reordered how I think about the whole event. For all those ages, the oxygen was not going into the sky at all. The ocean drank it first. Early seawater was loaded with dissolved iron, and oxygen and iron crave each other with a kind of chemical desperation. So as the cyanobacteria exhaled, the gas never got the chance to build up in the water or climb into the air. Instead, it seized the iron and dragged it straight down. Dissolved metal turned solid and settled onto the seafloor as rust, layer over patient layer. Dark bands of iron oxide sinking into the mud and hardening slowly into stone. Quietly, invisibly, the entire ocean was rusting from the inside out. Here's the detail that raises the hair on my arms, because it is not a theory you have to take on faith. Those bands are still with us. Geologists call them banded iron formations, and they streak through some of the oldest rock we know, in ribbons of deep red and slate gray, a striped photographic negative of a disaster developing across an almost unthinkable span, printed frame by frame into the crust. You can lay your open palm flat against the evidence and feel the cold of it. Read the colors like a scientist, and you can almost watch the calendar turn. The gray layers are iron oxide settling out in a pulse of poison. The red bands, the quieter seasons in between, alternating over and over as the sea choked and recovered and choked again. And a final irony sits folded inside that stone. Those same rusted layers are today the single greatest source of iron ore we have. Nearly every steel beam, every ship's hull, every skyscraper standing over your head was mined out of the fossilized wound the oxygen tore into the sea. We are quite literally building our civilization out of the scab left by the first great poisoning. The gas that once rusted the ocean now holds up our cities, and almost nobody who rides an elevator to the 40th floor has any idea they are standing on the buried proof of a catastrophe. The ocean, though, could only swallow so much. Sooner or later, the dissolved iron ran out. The seas could not soak up another gram of rust, and the oxygen had nowhere left to go but up. Everything hinges on this moment, and it carries a name: the Great Oxidation Event, unfolding somewhere around 2,400 million years ago. For the first time since the world began, free oxygen started to gather in the atmosphere itself, thickening season over season in a sky that had never once held it. Read that through modern eyes and it sounds like a sunrise, the planet finally turning breathable, the dawn of the world we know. To the creatures actually alive at the time, it was the end of everything. Their air was curdling into acid on the invisible scale of their own chemistry. A gas that had spent an eternity safely locked away in rust now crept into every dark refuge, every pore and pocket and sheltered crevice, tearing through the delicate inner machinery of organisms that, across that immense span, had never needed the slightest defense against it. So they died. Not a scattered few of them, but vast, unknowable swaths of the only life this world had ever carried, extinguished by something they could neither survive nor flee nor even sense until it had them. This is exactly why researchers reach for a word as heavy as Holocaust. By some estimates, it may rank as the largest die-off in Earth's whole history, measured by the sheer share of life erased. Though I'll be straight with you here, this is deep microbial time, and nobody can hand you a clean body count the way we can for the later age of shells and bones. What we can say with real confidence is that the ruling life of the world met something it had no answer for, and the great majority of it simply vanished. You would think a single poisoning on that scale would be enough. But the oxygen was not finished, and its second blow landed from a direction almost nobody would ever guess. Turn your attention back to that low, hazy sky, the one kept warm by all that methane. Methane happens to be a ferociously powerful greenhouse gas, and for countless ages it had wrapped the young, faint-sunned Earth in a thermal blanket that kept the whole surface from freezing solid. Oxygen is methane's chemical undoing. As the new gas flooded the atmosphere, it attacked the methane molecule by molecule and shredded that blanket down to nothing. Robbed of its warmth almost overnight in geological terms, the temperature of the entire planet fell straight off a cliff. Ice spread down from the poles and refused to stop. Onward it crawled across the continents, sheeted over the open seas, and kept advancing until, as far as we can tell, the whole surface of the world lay locked in white. Scientists know this deep freeze as the Huronian glaciation, and it may well have been the first Snowball Earth, a frozen marble gleaming silently in the black. Imagine standing on that surface, no open water anywhere on the horizon, glaciers grinding down to the equator, the whole biosphere pushed to a handful of thin refuges under the ice, and around warm volcanic vents where a little life could still cling on. The organisms that had spent an eternity ruling a warm, poison-free ocean were now trapped between two killers: the gas that scorched their chemistry and the cold that seized their world, with almost nowhere left to hide. Hold the full shape of what oxygen had just done. First, it poisoned the living world, and then, for an encore, it froze the corpse. One gas, the very same one filling your chest at this second, murdered most of life, and then sealed the survivors beneath a planet-wide winter that dragged on for ages. Were this where the tale ended, oxygen would stand as nothing more than the single most efficient killer the world has ever produced, a gas that arrived emptied the planet twice over, and left only silence and ice behind. It does not end there, and this is the turn that makes the whole story worth telling. The pivot where the poison begins, impossibly, to become us. Scattered through the wreckage of that frozen, chemically scorched world, a few survivors clung on. Certain organisms had, by sheer accident of their inner chemistry, found a way not merely to tolerate the oxygen, but to harness it, to point that reactivity at their own advantage. What they discovered is the reason you have the energy to sit here decoding these words instead of lying in warm mud as a passive film of slime. Burning fuel with oxygen, the process we call aerobic respiration, releases far more energy than the old anaerobic ways of scraping a living in the dark ever could. That gap is not some slim advantage. It is the difference between firing up an engine and rubbing two damp sticks together and praying for a spark. The exact gas that had annihilated the old order turned out to be the richest source of power any organism had ever laid hold of. The anaerobes that survived were still scraping by on tiny, inefficient trickles of energy, squeezing a faint living out of chemistry in the dark. The newcomers reached for the deadliest thing in their whole environment and turned it into a furnace, pulling many times the energy out of the very same scrap of food. Once you can run that hot, you are no longer just surviving, you are building. These survivors were not simply enduring the toxin any longer, they had learned to breathe it. They had taken the very force that killed nearly everything around them and rebuilt it into fuel. And honestly, the moment that finally clicked for me, it stopped feeling like a disaster story and started feeling like the most improbable rescue in the history of the world. Once life could pull that much raw energy out of a single breath, everything downstream cracked open into possibility. And this is where you and I finally step onto the stage. Complexity is monstrously expensive. Assembling a body out of many cooperating cells, forever growing and repairing tissue, moving with intent, and above all, running a brain, costs energy on a scale the old starved world could never once have paid. Oxygen was the paycheck that finally covered the bill. With that kind of power suddenly on tap, cells could balloon in size and grow elaborate, could band together, divide their labor, specialize, and over enormous stretches of time, build up everything from a drifting jellyfish to a towering redwood to the wet, humming, 3-pound organ behind your eyes that is turning these marks into meaning right now. Every large, active thing you can name is, at bottom, an oxygen engine, a muscle contracting, a heart beating, a thought firing, all draw on that same rich chemistry the anaerobes could never touch. None of it, not one animal, not a single plant, not you, could ever run on the meager trickle that powered the world before. Strip the oxygen back out and complex life does not slow down. It never appears in the first place. The planet stays a smear of microbes forever, a green film going nowhere, waiting for a spark of energy that would never have come without the very catastrophe that nearly ended it all. The catastrophe did not merely clear the stage, it poured the foundation. That same poison which emptied the planet is the identical power source that refilled it, this time with something wholly, gloriously new. Large, hungry, complicated life. Life shaped like us. The worst thing that ever happened to the living world turned out, given enough deep time, to be the best thing that ever happened to it. And that reversal still knocks the wind out of me every time I trace the chain from a microbe's waste gas to the animal reading this. So the next time someone tells you to go outside and get some fresh air, remember what that air actually is. It is the exhaust of the greatest catastrophe life ever inflicted on itself. Every breath you take is you running on the same poison that once wiped the slate of the planet almost clean. The microbes that filled the sky were not building a world for us. They were just living and dying and quietly changing the chemistry of everything. But in poisoning the old world, they accidentally lit the fuse for a new one. For big, hungry, complicated life that burns oxygen fast enough to grow a body and a brain and a strange little urge to look back 3 billion years and understand where it came from. We are not the heroes of this story. We are what the poison made, long after it stopped being a weapon and started being the